Why is cycling banned in most of the public spaces in the UK? All the nicest places to go in town usually ban cyclists from them. There must be a reason for this. Is it that they're complete nuisances and nutters? Is it that they'll ruin the place? If you look at some of the great plazas and squares around Europe, then cycling is usually permitted, and it normally adds to a place rather than taking away from it. I want to look at what we can do in the UK that would mean we'd allow cyclists in some of these places without being banned, and that they would add to the place, so people would see a cyclist going past and think, that's nice, that's reaffirmed my faith in humanity, rather than, oh my god, what's this antisocial nut job about to do to me? So that's what I really want to look at in this video over the next 10 minutes. So we're going to look at various examples of places around the UK where cycling has been allowed and try and unpick why does it work there and why is it banned in other places. Okay, let's have a look at some examples. Here's one, a fairly uncontroversial one. This is in a Swiss cottage in London. It's a visualization for a superhighway. Now, by anybody's stretch of the imagination, this does not look like a superhighway. This is clearly some public realm, some trees, some lighting, a nice wide crossing, the unpicking of a gyratory, great space for buses to go through. It's linking the town centre with the library. It's just a nice place to be, and it's a real pedestrian prioritised space. There's also, if you look really carefully, some kind of suggested route for cyclists through the middle of it. Now, I'm suggesting that the scheme would go down a lot better if we focused on those aspects rather than saying, hey look, we're bundling a superhighway through your area. So the first point I want to make really is that there's a marketing element to this. We've got to sell people on the outcomes they want, and everybody wants to live in a place like this where you unpick a gyrator, where you make it nicer to walk around your area, when people of all shapes and sizes and ages and abilities can get through and do their thing. So that's the first example. Here's another similar example in Glasgow. You can see there's definitely a cycle route going through there, but what is even more definite is this is a pedestrian crossing space for a major high street. There's some shopping activity, and the pedestrians clearly have priority. So yes, there are buses, yes, there are cars, and yes, there are bikes going through there, but nobody's in any doubt who has the priority here. And that's one of the things that we've got to do. If we're going to allow cyclists into these spaces, we still need to make it clear that pedestrians have priority, or we'll never get in. Have a look at this one in Newcastle as well. Quite an interesting new visualization. In this instance, the cycling's a lot clearer. You've got that red route there, but it does look to be a similar level, definitely in parts, although they put some shading in, so clearly there's a little bit of a debate going on there. But really, I'd say it's still adding to the space, and the use of planters and trees and nice materials really kind of suggests that this is a place that you want to be, and a vast improvement on the street as it is at the moment. Here's another example from London. Someone trying to incorporate cycling with greening. So again, that's the kind of place where you want to be. What people's eyes are drawn towards, the social spaces and the kids and the nice clean air quality and people going about their business. Meanwhile, cycling's going on. Meanwhile, the buses are going through there. But it's all incorporated. So we're selling the space and we don't want to ruin it. That's the point I'll keep coming back to time and time again. Similar to this archway scheme here, where what draws you in is the new public space. And what they haven't done, like most of the places in the United Kingdom that have these kind of plazas, they haven't banned cyclists. They found a way for it to go through there. They've actually lined up street furniture and trees to kind of keep cyclists in one space. But also, there's no real, this is your dedicated space, cyclists. It's just clearly a nice cut through that you can use, and people who are walking or gathering or standing or socialising in the area are kept in a kind of different part. So for me, that's another great example. So the fundamental question we have to ask is, how do you apply cycling to a street without ruining it? Particularly a street where the decision's already been made to ban all vehicles. And let's not forget that cyclists are vehicles and that they can cause stress, particularly to people with visual impairments. So now that decision's been made, how do we get them back in order to resolve some severe network difficulties? If you look at a place like Leicester Square, for example, have to do an enormous route round to get to the other side, Whereas if we could allow cyclists to go across the bottom park, that would save 10-15 minutes on journeys. So it's really important that we could learn to make this case. When it comes to cycling, it's quite difficult. Everybody knows the roads are for cars. We could argue with that, but that's what everybody knows. Everybody knows, well, the footways are for pedestrians. When we're talking about for pedestrians, definitely not for cyclists. So everybody kind of knows that. But the point is, and I'm already confused as you can tell, where do cyclists go? Do they go on the roads? In which case they're mixing with people that are larger and vehicles that are much stronger and faster and deadlier? Or do they go on the footway where they're mixing with people that would be really irritated and annoyed by their presence, might well be put off, and it might well ruin their day? Where do cyclists go? Or do we try and take some space from the pedestrians or the drivers and give cyclists their own dedicated space? That's certainly what we've been campaigning for many years, but it's very difficult. But what do you do in a space that's been dedicated fully to pedestrians, but you really want to cycle down there? That's really what we've got to unpick. I'm going to introduce some principles now that I think would help us to do this, and really we need to test them and make sure that they are valid. We can apply it, because if we can do this, then we can overcome some severe central town centre severance points. So that's what we're going to try and do. The first principle that I'm going to put forward is that clarity breeds speed. So the clearer the cycle route is, maybe there's a level difference, or maybe it's just a material choice, but the clearer it is, I'll be clear myself, the faster cyclists will go. Let's have a look at this example from Kingston. Now, this is the ancient market in the centre of Kingston. Clearly a pedestrian priority space, but they've tried to be subtle and suggested a path of least resistance for cyclists through there. Now, if they'd put like a curb segregated coloured green or blue track through there, I'm guessing, because nobody's really tested this, but I'm proposing that cyclists will go faster. So the first mission of the designer is to decide, well, how clear do I want to be? What kind of behaviour do I want? I want cyclists in the area. What level of subtlety can I choose where I kind of suggest that they go in certain areas? So it needs to be strong enough to suggest, but not strong enough to say, hey, you've got priority here. That's the kind of like a sliding bar of decision making that I want people to think about. So I think this Kingston one's a really interesting example. And here's a few more. This is Derbyshire Street in Tower Hamlets. See the way the cycling's a slightly different colour. Very interesting there. What we've got here's Leicester. Now Leicester are like a little bit of the masters of allowing cycling in their pedestrian priority spaces. In fact, in their whole pedestrianised town centre, you can pretty much cycle everywhere, and people do. But people do it at quite a nice low speed. That's what we tend to find when cycling's allowed, and it's not like overly prioritised. In this case, Leicester's so subtle, they just let you do it and don't even suggest spaces or places that you actually take a line. But still, this principle holds firm. The clearer you make it, the faster you go. So have a think about that. Sometimes it's a good thing to promote speed. It might be a commuter route, or maybe you'd want to let pedestrians know that cyclists are going to be coming through this area. So get clear about it, but just acknowledge that fact. That's the kind of first design principle I want to mention. Clarity breeds speed. The second principle I want to talk about is to promote forgiveness. Now, what the hell does that mean in design terms? It's kind of one of the Dutch sustainable safety principles. That's why I quite like it. Be forgiving with your design. So what if someone doesn't do exactly what you think they're going to do? I know a lot of engineers, particularly when it comes to cycling, they go, it's okay, we have a safe way for cyclists to go. They turn there, they go up there, they get off their bike, they walk it over the bridge, they go down, they cycle around the back of those houses, come out through the bins, and we've nailed it. No need to deal with this junction. Where who would know that someone was just going to ride straight through that junction and they haven't followed what the designer thought and imagined they would do, and then they're in peril? So really, I think you have to be forgiving. You have to think, what if people behave the way humans actually behave? So in this case, we're in the centre of the city of London. pedestrians everywhere, lots of people doing high-powered business deals. They're going to be walking, they're going to be on their phones, they're going to be chitty-chatting, they're going to be having drinks, they're going to be spilling all over the place. So if we were to put like a full curb heights in, it's more stuff for people to trip on as they're crossing the road at angles without looking. And it's the same thing goes for cycling in this area. If we put a dedicated cycle route through there, then again it's going to be the faster cyclists and it's not going to be very forgiving. What if someone wants to jump out of the bike, stop, chat to someone, crack a business deal? What if pedestrians are walking everywhere? Just try to be forgiving with what you do. What do people do? What humans do? Design streets around that. So in this case as well, it's also a low traffic speed. So any car coming through there is thinking, someone's going to step out here, I need to slow down, which is like the kind of opposite of road safety. You'd want to go, well, actually, a car's coming down here, so people need to be got out of the way. Let's put guardrail everywhere, which is something that the City of London used to have. But they went, hang on, the people who are working, shopping, hanging out here, doing business, they're more important than a few cars that are zooming through. Let's give those priority. And in their recent transport strategy, they're going full tilt on this kind of approach. So I think it's going to be quite a forgiving environment for pedestrians. And again, we want cyclists to go through there, but I think you have to be forgiving towards cyclists as well, who are also part of the good equation, as it were, for active travel. So be forgiving. So think about if everybody does different movements, different design lines, make sure they're all catered for, and start thinking, how can I make my design forgiving for whatever people do, rather than the usual UK approach, which is how do I control everybody and make them do exactly what I want to do, because that's safe. There's a principle to consider. Okay, let's look at the third principle now. And this one I call, and it's quite difficult to say, passive passing. So what on earth does that mean? It means it's not the speed you approach as a cyclist if you're around pedestrian, it's the speed that you pass them that counts. So some people, when they're allowing cyclists into pedestrian priority areas, might put a speed limit on there, a completely unrealistic one, 5 miles an hour or something for cyclists, and no one's going to stick to that. And then frankly, why should they? Because it's more efficient to get a little bit of speed up. But when you are coming in the vicinity of a pedestrian, it's quite important that you slow down to almost their speed, so that you're not dinging the bell way in advance for them to jump out of the way and actually make way, and you take priority over them. Rather, you're slowing down, and perhaps it's like a ding dong on that bell, a little please may I, or even slow down so you can actually talk to them saying, sorry, a little bit tight here, do you mind if I pass? Oh, certainly, that's fine. There's a nice passive way of passing somebody. So really, it's not the approach speed, it's how you behave in the vicinity of pedestrians. Because lots of pedestrians get really terrified if they suddenly jumped out of their nice walking environment when they're thinking about the issues of the day and someone dings them, or someone's on a bike, or they're going at a different speed. And remember that your perception alters the faster you're going. So someone in a car thinks they're just cruising along when they're doing 50. Someone on a bike thinks they're cruising along when they're doing 15. But for pedestrian, cruising along is 3 miles an hour, and all these other speeds seem horrific when you compare like the way you're travelling through a space. So really think down there. There's like the streets that I've seen in Europe where it's like drive at walking speed, and that's really what you want to do. For me, when it comes to cyclists, it's about passing at walking speed. How we get this across is quite difficult in design terms. Maybe it's like some kind of behavioural change campaign, but I like the use of lighting in this example. For me, it kind of calms everything down. It's like, okay, clearly this is pedestrian priority space. If you're a cyclist, I'd hope you think this and go, it's nice and it's subtle and it's calm, and the materials and the lighting are kind of adding to that. So you're thinking, how do I plot my way through here? I'll slow down, I'll try and get past this person. Maybe I'll even talk to them. It's still okay to talk to people. So passive passing is the third principle. The fourth principle is reduce stress. We're all overly stressed, particularly if you're in an urban environment and you're trying to work every day and get along, and particularly at the moment we're in the middle of an emergency, like a global pandemic, all quite stressful stuff. The last thing in the world we want is for the environments that we work in, that we live in, that we move around in, to increase our stress. So I think more and more people are starting to look at how can we build environments that actually reduces stress. When we were looking at the quiet ways in London, I was very much modelling those on like cruising cyclists, getting new people to go there, so they didn't feel pressurised to go fast, which is a real thing for some cyclists, particularly if you're on a super highway. There's a real pressure to keep up with people rather than annoy the cyclists around you, so that's quite stressful in itself. We want this to reduce it. We want people turning up at work feeling fit, active, healthy and stress-free. One of the things that the Cycle Boom project did, which is well worth looking at, was fit galvanic skin response kits to people and send them out on bike rides and see. Like it's a lie detector equipment, but it also measures stress, so they could see where they had big peaks of emotional reactions. Now, interestingly, there was obviously like places like junctions where there was huge spikes, which were kind of assumed because they're quite difficult the way junctions are designed in the UK, but also when you transition from one mode to another. And what I wanted to do on the Quiet Ways was send people out there and test the stress levels for new cyclists on there and say, actually, this is too stressful a route. We can't market it as the Quiet Way, and have that as a degree of the level of service expected from a route. Anyway, back to where we are now. Things like greening, planting, somewhere to sit, lots of space, clear visibility, slow cars, it all comes down to this. All those kind of healthy street objectives can really help reduce the stress of an environment. And the picture I've shown here is what I would suggest is a fairly stress-free environment. It's nice and green, there's things to see and do, there's stuff for the kids, you're open, you're wide, there's real indications that it's a slow design speed. Let's start thinking about reducing stress for people, and we could go that step further and actually make it fun. So you can actually reduce the stress that way. Definitely more and more stuff happening like that, and there's some new guidance out and designing for kids, so I think that's really important as well. We all want to be kids really and run around and hang out and not be worried about being run over all the time. So reduce that stress, thinking about designing environments that do that. That's the fourth principle: reduce stress. Okay, the fifth principle is that cyclists are guests. So we're allowing cyclists to go into pedestrian priority spaces. We've got to remember that this is first and foremost a pedestrian priority space. So we want to go there, but we don't want to turn up and take over and arrive there as a guest. And there's some quite great routes that do that. I'd suggest this route through Aldgate East in the City of London. It's quite a good example where there's a clear cycle route through there, but it doesn't feel like you're taking over the space. Clearly, you should expect someone to be standing in there on their phone, making a deal. Don't worry about it. You're the guest. You can't go in and start dictating terms to whoever's around you. So I think there's a real a fine art. And really, it kind of goes to that cycle street approach where the cars are guests, something that we learned from like Germany and the Netherlands, and actually spoke to the designers behind the Crow manual designing for cycle traffic. And I said, well, what do you do in pedestrian priority spaces with cyclists? And they go, well, then the cyclists are guests. So like all great ideas, we steal it from the Dutch and we try to incorporate it into UK practice. So I think this is one to real think about. There could be signs that do it, or again, it's going back to that kind of subtlety and the suggestion and acknowledging clear pedestrian design lines and making cyclists feel that they can be there. They have a legitimate right to be there, but they are not taking over. I think the street, Castle Street in Kingston's a really good example where they've kept the kind of memory of where the road was, but it's clearly a pedestrian priority area now. But there's something there, and there's something to suggest that there's some kind of movement function still on the road, so you feel like you've got a legitimate right to ride there, but, acknowledge where you are. If it's too busy and everybody's eating their sandwiches at lunch, you're not getting through. You're the guest, take it on the chin, and just go through. That's really what we're looking at with this fifth and final principle, that cyclists are the guests here. Let's be good guests. Let's not overstay our welcome. Okay, so all these principles sound like I've just made them all up. I've been thinking about these for many, many years because we've never really had a method or a way to actually approach slowing cyclists down. It's one of the great unstudied areas of research. Everybody wants to promote cycling and we want to get that modal shift, but then when you allow it, how do you keep them calm? I think this example, this picture that my boss took in Socky Hall Street from one of the schemes we did, kind of shows how all these principles are kind of applied in practice. There's a pedestrian there, she's on her phone, she's not looking, she's safe. there's someone zooming through, delivering like food, like it's a Deliveroo driver or an Uber Eats person, they're okay as well. But there's also space for a lady to walk in the cycle track while her son's learning to ride a bike. That's what you want to see. You've got all the different ranges of cyclists. No one's getting too aggro because there's someone walking in the track. It's all kind of level. There's people sat there enjoying the space. There's some trees, so it's calm and relaxing and forgiving, and there's plenty of space to do so. There's nothing to trip over. There's nothing to unduly stress yourself around. There's just a nice, pleasant environment for everybody. So yeah, there are issues on this scheme as well, but I think this picture kind of encapsulates the 5 principles pretty well. So that's what I'd like people to think about. We'd really like to do some research on testing these, and I did have a plan to go around some of the great plazas of Europe, looking at these 5 principles and quantifying them to an extent, so we can actually test things out. But we are where we are, so I thought I'd share them with people before I really tested them to see what you thought and see whether you had any ideas of whether you think these would actually help practice. Can we make a case for bringing cyclists back into our town and city centres? Are these the principles to do it? So we don't have a methodology. As soon as someone says, but cyclists will ruin the space, they're absolute nutters, then we go, well, maybe they won't. And we go, actually, we can quantify that, and we've got some principles to test that we think will keep them in line. Then the conversation's still going. You're not just showing the door straight away, and that's really what we've got to get to. We need to allow cyclists in our city and town centres. We need the access. We've got huge holes in the network if we don't, or we're forcing cyclists to go on some of the busier roads. Not a great look, particularly when we're trying to promote active travel and get more people walking and cycling. So let's have a look at these principles. Let's try and take on these spaces. That's really what I want this video to do, and I hope it's of use. Thanks.